Oh, God. Okay, cool. We're recording. Hi. We are the Lads Who Game. And if you're hearing this,
It's the year 3000.
Yeah, it's the year 3000. We don't know where you're possibly listening to this at all. We are not going into this with any sort of like specific goal in mind by any means, but we think this is likely going to be our most contentious discussion about a game ever, and thought it would be interesting to record it.
And rather than hire 3 separate lawyers, we thought that it would just be better to record it so that nobody gets hurt in the process.
Just like a little background, we started Lads Who Game just as a few friends who were interested in playing Animal Crossing a long time ago. It eventually formed into us wanting to do sort of like a video game book club, which eventually escalated and is now turned into whatever this is.
Escalated
A media company.
Really a full-fledged enterprise.
Yeah. LLC.
Yeah. We're on Instagram primarily at Lads Who Game. We also have a website, ladswhogame.com. Twitter.
We have a Twitter. Let's plug the Twitter because I feel like we have some good takes on Twitter.
Yeah, we're on Twitter.
You're just saying that because that was your idea.
I did secure the Twitter handle and 14 followers you could add to the list if you wanted to.
That same thing, same handle at Lads Who Game. We're also on Twitch. There's nothing there. We're on TikTok. There's nothing there.
Placeholders.
But maybe someday soon.
Maybe someday soon. We have a Neopets account as well.
I wish.
So basically, the gist of what we do is we'll pick a game that we all 3 play at the same time, either a game that is new that none of us have played, maybe some of us have played it, maybe all of us have played it. And so right now we have wrapped up our most recent game in our second season, which is Metroid Dread. Jack, I think you have...
So for those of you who don't know, Metroid Dread is an action-adventure game, and it's developed by Mercury Steam and Nintendo EPD. It was released October 8th of 2021 for the Nintendo Switch. The basic logline, if you've never played a Metroid game, which I haven't, and was somewhat confused going in, is that it follows the Super Smash Bros. Favorite mainstay, Samus Aran. Upon investigating a mysterious transmission on a planet ZDR, Samus faces a mysterious foe that traps her in this dangerous world. The remote planet has been overrun by vicious alien life forms and murderous robots called EMMIs or Emmys. Hunt or be hunted as you make your way through a labyrinth of enemies in Samus's most intense side-scrolling adventure yet. True to form of the logline, it is a 2D side-scroller platformer game, so not of the Metroid Prime series.
Yeah. No, it's more
It's Metroidvania, I think they call them.
Yeah,
Metroidvania.
The original Metroid games,
like Castlevania.
Okay.
Metroid. It's a similar gameplay as far as I understand.
This was for a lot of people a surprise announcement in a lot of ways. People have been speculating, and there were rumors of Metroid Prime 4, which was their first person shooter, which has been announced, canceled, announced, and kind of in development hell, it seems like right now. And then so this one came up and was definitely a surprise. And as the lads, none of us actually have played a Metroid game before.
Correct.
So this was a foray into that. It's also our first 2D side scroller that we're playing together as the lads, for sure.
Yeah. Not ever.
Not ever, right. Not ever, but first 2D side scroller that we're playing with the lads. So we were excited to play. And we have some mixed opinions. So we're gonna give ourselves a little intro, give our rating, which we are on the standard lad rating system. If you're not familiar, 1 to 5 lads. Some people might refer to them as stars. A 5-star rating, etc. But
it's unlike the metric system because it's only used in the U.S.
Yeah, exactly. A very small corner of the U.S. So we'll give our ratings, a little quick blurb, and then we'll dive into a more like full-fledged discussion here. But Jack, if you wanna take it away.
Yes. So am I just saying my number, and then going into why, or should I say why and then build up to the number?
I mean, let's
however you
want, however you feel.
Okay. Well, I guess because we're talking a lot about I teased this to you guys separately that it's like I went back and forth between two numbers for a long time. We do half ratings and whole number ratings, and I went back and forth between two. And when I went over some of the language that we use to describe different ratings, unfortunately, I did bump it down to a 2 out of 5 for me because of the phrases in that language. I think in the language for a 2 out of 5 it says is a bad game, and I wouldn't actually use that for this game. But the things that did stick out to me were the phrases not engaging, boring or confusing story, and most importantly, it was a chore to finish, which was my big takeaway from this game. Without going into too much detail, I think that this game has a lot of objective merits. It's pretty graphically stunning for a 2D side-scroller. There's like a lot of care and thought put into the cinematics and the score and just the overall tone and ambience of the whole thing, and we'll get into that. And it wasn't like a horrible slog the whole way, but towards the end, I'd say probably the last 5 hours of it, which is the majority of my playtime, it just felt like every time I was coming back into the game, it felt like a chore that I had to complete because we had decided to play and finish this game. So it just, every time I went in, I was like, this is a chore, this is homework. It is not fun for me to be playing this game right now. So that's ultimately why I landed on 2 out of 5.
Gotcha.
Right,
okay,
here we go.
Yeah, here's my long-awaited rating here. So,
Can you say that about your own rating?
Yes,
highly anticipated.
Highly anticipated, everyone, and I'm gonna piss a couple people here off.
Here we fucking go.
I believe Metroid Dread is a 5-lat game. I do believe it's a 5-lat game. I believe it is as flawless and perfect as possible. I'm gonna read the exact metrics that we had sort of come up with as a collective, which is near flawless, superb gameplay, story, visuals, and has an X factor that makes it subjectively special.
It's so funny you haven't said I'm joking yet.
Yeah.
So I do want to I honestly think that all of that is true about this game. I think for the genre that it was doing, I think it's almost as perfect as it can get. I will add a caveat to that, which is that if you look back at some of the games that I've rated lower than this game, and the first two that come to mind obviously are recently Hades and Red Dead Redemption 1, which I rated a 4.5 flat, which I will definitely stick with those ratings for those in retrospect. That being said, I enjoyed playing those games more. I think I would go back to those games before I would go back to Metroid. I think that, I'm probably thinking about those a lot more than I'm thinking about Metroid in a lot of ways. But there's, in both of those games and other games, I think there's some pretty key elements that I'm like, here's something I really just think it missed the mark of that perfect rating here. And all as simple as perhaps Metroid Dread is relative to those games, I'm finding a tough time thinking of any sort of significant flaw for me that drops it down. So I will add that this is not my favorite game of all time by any means. There's a lot of games with lower ratings that I love a lot more than this subjectively, but from an objective standpoint, I feel like this is for me a 5-lat game.
You're saying that it's, for you, it accomplished successfully exactly what it set out to do.
Yes, as a genre, as its ambitions,
Gotcha.
It's set out as perfectly. There's hundreds of games I can think of that are much more ambitious that even may do specific this is maybe a better combat system in another game, or maybe a better this in another game, things like that. But for what exactly what you said, for what this was setting out to do, I think it executed it flawlessly, and I had a really good time playing it. And there's that X factor for me that we'll chat about in a second, and not just the literal X in the game. So, all
right, now let's hear from the prosecution.
And the Simon potentially of the group.
Yeah, well, interesting, lad,
Are you
Robert.
the Paula, and then I'm the Randy.
Oh, I get to be Simon?
You get to, I think in this...
I feel like because you're going to come in with the vitriol, you know?
Right.
Listen, so, okay, I hear what you're saying, Robert, and I think that I think you're shockingly wrong, which we'll talk about in due time. For those that don't know, I have really had an emotional response to this game. And I think that comes from the simple fact that I believe, a belief that I hold, is that if you want to play a video game, if you sit down with the full intention going in to be, I want to enjoy myself, I want to push through any challenges that there might be, and I want to get to the other side of that game and play this video game, you should be able to do so. I was not. I did not finish this game, despite the fact that I had the longest play time out of all three of us, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
What was your play time?
10 plus hours.
Yeah, I think my first run I did 8.5 and you did 7.5 to do the first one, and I haven't played it since beating it. So
and I think in my defense, and I can't believe I'm already defending here, but I think that says a lot. Like this can't just be written off. This criticism can't just be written off as, oh, well, you gave up too soon or you didn't try enough or whatever. I put some time into this game, and I got to a point where, as Jack was saying earlier, it just was not fun. It was a brutal slog through, maybe 6 of those 10 hours that I put into it, which is not how the game started, by the way, which we'll get into, because my main point, we'll talk a little bit about how it started off very promising and quickly sunk. At any rate, I ended up going with a 2 out of 5 on this. I think this is a bad game. I found it to, going back to the language of our lad scores here, I thought that this was some of the most horrendous gameplay that I've ever had. I think that it truly, pushed and exceeded the Switch's limits. I don't know about you guys, but man, my controller could not handle this game, could not allow me to do what apparently I needed to do on the screen.
I do want to talk about the controls.
Yeah, for the record, just because I'm actually not 100% sure, you were both using Joy-Cons, right, to play?
Correct.
Okay, and I was using...
I wish I had a Pro controller
but the thing, though,
but that's not an excuse.
It's not an excuse.
Not an excuse. Just to, because right. that can... whether intended or not, good or bad, can affect someone's play potentially. I know that if I was playing on my Joy-Cons, which famously, I think everyone kind of hates the Joy-Cons in a lot of ways. I mean, they're it's a cool design, but they mostly suck, I think, as a piece of plastic. So I think objectively, those potentially doesn't do well. I'm not saying that would have drastically changed your opinion or everything, but
sure. And again, I'm not saying that you're making this argument, but I also think that you can't use that as an excuse, you being just anyone who would say that, oh, well, you need to play this game using the Pro controller. You should not have to buy a $250 console and then buy a $60 game and then say, oh, but you can't use the default controls. You got to buy what is a Pro controller? Another $60 or something, I'm sure.
I think it's because the Joy-Cons are $80 for the set, right?
True.
I think it's $70 for the Pro controller.
Okay. So
regardless, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. Yeah.
And I was really shocked with some of the gameplay being completely inaccessible using the Pro or the Joy-Cons, I should say. And why that's so important too is because ultimately this game is not trying to tell a Red Dead Redemption 2 or 1 narrative, and I don't think it has to in order to get a 5 out of 5 score. And that's not at all what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to say that every game needs to be Red Dead 2. But that means that it's hanging its hat on its gameplay, and I think its gameplay was a miserable experience. I think it was a truly miserable experience. I have never had a game make me feel so bad about myself and I didn't like it, so a 2 out of 5.
I'm surprised. I was really waiting for you to say.
Me too.
Okay, so
I really
here's
was.
Here's the thing with that. Here's the thing with that.
I thought you were going to be closer to like 2.5, 3. And
that was what I was really at 2.5 in my heart, like and subjectively. But when I looked over the rating language, the phrase that got me was it was a chore to finish on 2.
Yeah,
and I was like, that is so accurate to my experience.
Okay, so it's tough, right? Because on one hand, I didn't finish the game, and so I'm sure there's a lot of our large fan base that would say immediately, well, if you didn't finish, that has to be an automatic 1 out of 5. Which I can understand that sentiment, but I think that the thing is, for me at least, a 1 out of 5 is like a game that is clearly lazy or a cash grab or something like that.
The intention was malicious.
Yeah, I think that they really tried with this game. I think that there is a lot of good things to be said. Don't cut out there, Robert, just for the record. I think there is a lot of positive in the game that we can certainly talk about. So I wouldn't go as far to say that this was lazy or a cash grab. Like I think that it just was poorly constructed, very poorly constructed to the point that, like, again, I couldn't finish the game. It was so unfun and so frustrating, and I'm excited to get into that more.
I think we talked about, because we were discussing whether, like, you should finish the game and like what that looks like timing wise. And I still hold the same opinion that even if you did make it through the game, I don't know if that would have changed your rating. Like I couldn't.
That's
like
the thing is you definitely wouldn't have.
There's a story element. There's story beats that, I mean, positive or negative. Like I know you, Jack, had a. And by the way, I'm Robert. I don't know if we've just said we need to say. I don't know if it like matters that much.
I just assume people not refer to me, but hi, my name is Jack. In case anybody wants to know.
I'm Jimmy, by the way, the one who gave it the second 2 out of 5 lads.
Yeah, so like if you're picking favorites,
Simon, Paula, and Randy.
That would have been good. You can refer to us as either, and I think that would be totally.
I also want to put on the record as well that I'm pretty sure, based on my memory, I in season 1 of the lads, our first batch of 10 games, gave out the most 5 out of 5 lads.
Yeah,
I think on average had the highest score. So like, I'm not just like.
Did you guys have 2 each on the 5 ratings?
I had 1.
I had 2. I had Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart and Ghost of Tsushima.
Yeah,
and then you had Red Dead 2.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess technically both playthroughs of Ghost, you had a 5, but like same
game.
Our
ratings changed, so and then I just had Hades.
Yeah. Point is though, like again, for anyone who happens to be listening to this and is unfamiliar with us as individuals, I'm not like. I don't make a living off of having like hot takes that are like very critical or anything. So
yeah, I feel like you've mostly been more on the positive actually in a lot of ways compared to other. Jack, you've mostly been the
Jack's usually the
Simon, so to speak.
Okay, so there's I should put it out there. So in 26 years of my life on this earth, I am constantly slandered as like the mean judge, like the harsh critic, like the over, whatever. And I just want to say, really, it's not. It's as much as possible. It's not an act. I'm not forcing it on. I really have a hard time liking things more than I like it. It's just I will not. I won't give something the benefit of the doubt if it didn't.
I mean, I can confirm Jack is a mean person.
Yeah, that's not what I said. I said I'm not a mean judge. I am a mean person.
We recently, between first and second season, we redid the way that we calculated our ratings. Like we came up with specific language. It's on our Instagram page, saved in the stories if you're interested in reading all of them. But we set out to really clearly define what each of these ratings mean, and I think it helped a lot. I think it's overall lowered our average ratings. I think we're only a few games in, but I think generally speaking it's lowered. And I would also consider myself pretty critical of art in general, and so the 5 is not without a challenge. Like I was in my head, I was like, well, no, it can't be. Like as I was going through, but I really couldn't think of something. And I think you had a similar comment when you were reviewing Hades.
And that was exactly my thing about Hades was when I was playing Hades, it wasn't ever this thing where I was thinking, this is the most perfect game I've ever played in my entire life. Mm-hmm. I just truly could not think of anything to critique about that game. And I did enjoy it. Like, I was like, this is a great game, and I'm really enjoying my time. And then when I thought about what you were saying about Metroid Dread, which is that it's like, it was the most successful version of what it was trying to do, that's how I felt about Hades.
Yeah. And we've so, like, just to get, like, you sort of get like a little bit on track here. We've talked about a lot of things in these like brief sort of like brief and not so brief sort of like overviews, but we do have a few topics that we want to dive into a little bit more detail, specifically starting with, if you guys think it's appropriate time.
Well, should we take an ad break first?
Yeah, first enjoy this.
Let's just do an ad break. Ready? Silence. Okay, the ad goes right there. So just put the ad there.
Put the ad there, and then if you can hear the Baja Blast in the mic there, that'll be what that is. Anyway, so get a little bit more into the weeds, so to speak, in the game. The first thing we want to talk about, generally speaking, is narrative and like tone of the games.
Would it be possible actually to use the bathroom first?
Yeah.
Can we actually
ad
have an ad break?
break.
This is a real ad break.
This is an ad break.
Because I have to pee.
Right. Yeah.
I just figured
So we should actually put an ad for Squatty Potty right here.
If anyone out there is listening, he's full of shit and he's about to dump it in the toilet. All right, now that we're all done shitting. Okay, cool. So let's go. Let's talk about narrative and like just tone, I guess, broadly. So I don't know. What do we?
I mean, I thought the tone was great. I loved it.
I loved the horror element. That was one thing that really, really stood out to me that I kind of wasn't expecting at all, particularly with the Emmy. I thought that the design of the Emmys, like anytime you were in an Emmy zone, that's what they're called, right? Yep. Emmy zones, with the like grainy filter, with the like black and white, with the sound design. We don't really have anything to talk about sound design here, but like one of the things I'd mention, other than what I thought the music score was good, is that like the sound of the Emmy and the like moments when you would roll up into a ball and the Emmy would come right up to Samus and like kind of like essentially like sniff around a beast, I thought was like so good.
No, tonally this game knew exactly what it was setting up to do. I mean, even the when you get to the network stations and the safe zones and you talk to Adam,
yeah.
The fact that the dialogue and the text boxes are all repeating like, you are not powerful enough. Like your goal is to survive and get to the top in one piece. Like it's not about being an action hero. It's not about being a superhero. Like that was all genius in the way that it's really instilling this sense of dread in you and this feeling of like I'm in danger.
Yeah,
I think what helped with the tone for me as well too, and what maybe is sometimes lacking in these 2D side scrollers is that I liked how periodically it would zoom in on Samus and have almost like a first person view or like a fully 3D view, which I think really sold, like it put me into her boots, her space suit a bit more than if it didn't do that, which just again helped everything be scarier. Like again, one of my favorite moments, maybe my favorite moment of the game, was when you would get the Omega Cannon and have to line up the Emmy.
Yeah, that was great.
And you would, and again, you'd zoom in, and it would put you in an almost first person mode as the thing slowly is creeping towards you. I thought the tone was great, even from the opening menu. Like you start up the game, and it's got this very like doom and gloom sounding soundtrack. Like the title card is like buzzing in and out, like a computer glitching or whatever. Like, really fantastic tone.
The voice of Adam, very like Hal, from Space Odyssey.
This video game takes a lot of inspiration from movies.
Yeah.
Obviously 2001. And I think it's Alien too, right? That has the tracker with the like the red dot that's like above them, or am I thinking of something else? Or is that Parasite?
I think you're thinking of something else. But I actually thought Alien was a really good influence on potentially like on like any just sort of like space horror type game. Really feels like this. I don't know. I could be
What
wrong.
am I thinking of? Not Parasite. I meant Predator.
Oh, you are thinking
Predator.
of Predator.
Yeah, that's what I'm not. I don't know why I said Parasite.
Yeah, his little eyes. I know that from Fortnite. Actually. Famous
It's
Fortnite
like
character.
Predator, I think.
Predator.
Oh God, I'm sure someone is like laughing on the other side if anybody's listening to this, but I think it's Predator is the scene. There's like they have a tracker, and it's like they have a red dot on the tracker and it's like above them, and it's like getting closer and closer.
Oh
and closer.
No, you are talking about Alien.
That
I'm
is
sorry.
Alien.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
I thought you
okay.
were talking about in Predator. You know, he had like
No.
eyes.
I just mean because with the Emmy, one of the see on the Emmy in the Emmy zones, you see on the mini map the red dot.
Yep.
And you can hear it too, and that. So yeah, that's what I meant is that it borrows from that an Alien in 2001.
Can we talk about as well for the tone? The backgrounds of these various places that you're on, the various planets and stuff. I think one of my favorite backgrounds was, God, I don't remember what planet it was, but there's a moment, potentially right after you meet with, God, I'm spacing on the name, real gamer stuff here. What is it, Beak?
Ravenbeak is the good one.
No, I'm thinking of Ravenbeak.
Oh, you are.
I'm thinking,
Ravenbeak's the bad one.
Ravenbeak's the bad one.
There's the it's here.
What are they called? Machins?
Yeah, we have no recollection of this at all. But on the last page of the character sheet, this guy,
Quiet Robe.
Quiet Robe.
Quiet Robe.
Would have never guessed that.
Yeah,
if you gave me that.
I know like two.
Oh no, not
characters.
Machin. What is it? Thola?
Yeah.
Oh man.
We really
It's
liked
Thola.
this game.
Yeah,
So Quiet Robe shuts down the Emmys at a certain point.
Yeah.
And there's this really cool moment where you go to like the next planet after Quiet Robe is assassinated. And by the way, full spoilers in this podcast.
I was thinking about it. I'll put something at the beginning with spoilers.
And so, but anyway, like you go to the next section of the planet, I should say, and in the background you see, I think the purple Emmy or whatever is frozen.
Yeah.
That was so cool because I'm like, all right, when is the jump scare coming? And the second you see it frozen, you're like, when is he coming back?
Well,
alive?
because it's been such an established part of the gameplay for so long that you're like, well, no way did I just have to like trigger this cutscene for the Emmy problem to like go away.
There were a few backgrounds as well where you see like a boss that you're about to fight in the background.
Or you see some sort of monster that's like being experimented on or something like that.
Yeah.
There are some really and this is
the metal vents popping.
Yeah,
too.
and this is the kind of stuff that when I was talking about in terms of like genre of game and like really elevating it to a point, like they didn't need that. They've had stuff like that in games like this in the past, and even in Metroid games, like from what I've seen. But the fact that there was so much like detail in the background of this stuff, I thought was like so cool to like run around and see. And like I'll say that that eventually like wears out a little bit, and it's not necessarily going to make it like a perfect game by any means, but something I really enjoyed for sure.
I think I definitely agree with all the tonal parts of this argument. I will say the narrative, the way that the tone serves the narrative is great, but the narrative ultimately for me felt super flat.
Yeah, I'm actually interested in if you wouldn't mind like elaborating, because I think I had a great time with the narrative overall.
My problem is that there are ultimately like three plot beats to the entire story. Mm-hmm. The first plot beat being you crash on this planet, you're stranded, you have to make your way back to the ship, which is like obviously the intro of the game.
Yeah.
The second plot beat is when you meet Quiet Robe, and he's like, here's the situation. This is the antagonist that you fought is named Ravenbeak. He gave you amnesia because of X, Y, and Z problem. There are, what are the parasites called?
X.
There are the X parasites that are on this planet. He's trying to use them for his nefarious means. And then you finally get a sense of like what the greater issue is other than just your survival. Mm-hmm. And then really the last plot beat is the ending twist, I guess, which I would be curious to hear a longtime Metroid fan's perspective on this, because I don't know a lot about Samus and I don't know a lot about the Metroid franchise. But do you know did you look up the end of the story or
didn't care, so please go for it.
Okay, so again, spoiler alert, like the end of this game, the plot beat is that you find out that Ravenbeak is Samus's father of some kind.
That's fucking stupid.
Yeah,
That
but
is
I mean,
so cool.
I think here's my problem. So, okay, I understand that it's not trying to be like he is like her daddy, like he's like her like he like genetically engineered her or whatever, right?
Genetically engineered her to essentially compete with the X is my understanding, because like she has X DNA, so is like unable to.
I thought she had Metroid DNA.
Metroid DNA, so you're totally right. She has like Metroid DNA, so she's like unaffected by the Metroid and
by the X, right?
Yes, exactly. She's unaffected by it, and now Ravenbeak is trying to like is sort of like created. And again, I'll echo what you said, which is that I'm not really familiar with Metroid's like canon by any means, but essentially using Samus to complete world domination or like whatever.
Sure. My problem with that narrative beat for me was that it's not a payoff. There hasn't been a question of who Samus's father is in this game.
For the sake of getting
it's not like it's setting up this mystery about who created Samus or like why did someone create Samus. It's just Samus is. And oh, by the way, did you know that Ravenbeak created her because of X, Y, and Z reason? And so ultimately it's a twist with no payoff. It's just a twist. And it does the number one thing that I hate that twists do in movies and video games and TV shows, which is they try to tell you with the music scoring and with the way that the cinematic plays out that this is a big deal and you should be shocked right now. And I was literally like, I don't understand.
I totally disagree. I think that throughout the whole game, you got these moments where, like, even from the very beginning, Ravenbeak spares you. And so throughout the whole game peppered in, it's like, why is he sparing you? Like, what is his reason for like bringing you here? Because you find out throughout the narrative, I don't remember the exact reason. This is like not like a super in-depth thing by any means. This is like, and I wouldn't go as far to say like contrived necessarily, but like with all sci-fi, it's a lot of stuff that's just based off of like old sci-fi novels that everyone's doing for like a million times. So I'm not saying it's like revolutionary in any ways, but in any way, but I think the whole like what is Ravenbeak doing here? Why is Ravenbeak doing here? And the other thing that I thought was really cool is with Adam, essentially Ravenbeak had like been kind of taking control of Adam. It was how I read it.
That was weird to me though too, because I didn't understand. I was like, is the takeaway supposed to be that I've been talking to Ravenbeak the whole time, or just right now? That's what I didn't understand that. For those if it's unclear, at the very end of the game when you go to beat Ravenbeak, you talk to Adam one more time, and then it is revealed that Adam in this particular scenario is Ravenbeak talking to you.
I think Adam, if I'm not 100% sure. I feel like
what does the Wikipedia entry say?
What is that? The guy
isn't he connected to the ship?
Yeah. So I think Adam is
the controls Samus's gunship.
Yeah, and so Adam's in the game. So I don't think it was the entire time. I don't think Adam has always been. Well
but I mean,
maybe. I mean, I see. I don't think of it as confusing. I think of it as a mystery that like doesn't necessarily need to be solved.
And I think that like this game. And these types of games that are more focused on less of a narrative and more on gameplay, like didn't need to have that complex of a story. And while I did not get to that plot twist, as you heard moments ago, my immediate reaction was like, that's dumb. I don't think I agree with Jack because like I feel like there was never a moment where I had that question of like, are they related, or like is this a past foe that Samus has had? I was just bought into the idea that there's a strong alien out there and Samus has to deal with it.
You never got those. You never had the question of like, why is he?
I guess I forgot about the fact that he spares her in the beginning, but honestly, we'll talk about it in a little bit too. But one of the big issues that I have with this game is that it was really hard to remember where I was picking it up again between play sessions. So I think that probably contributed to my confusion because I truly forgot that was the intro. I thought you just escaped or something. But
and to go back to that point of like he spares her. I don't know. he spared her, it didn't immediately make me think that they had some sort of like deep, familial connection.
I didn't think so either. I didn't have that question at the end, which is I think why I liked it so much is because like why did he spare her? They kind of like alluded to, oh, maybe she can be like the key to something, and I think she is, but I also think just that element is interesting. And again, I'm not familiar with the Metroid lore. Maybe that kind of like fucks with a bunch of stuff that like has been established prior.
I just wonder if that has been a more of a through line for Samus as a character between games, which is that she is curious about her origin,
right?
Yeah. And maybe this answers the question, and maybe that is exciting for longtime Metroid fans. However, I still feel that anything that you do like that should make sense in the context of playing it alone.
And I would actually take one of the points that you made, which I don't know if you were necessarily implying that this was a negative, but the like three plot point beats or whatever.
I meant that in the pejorative sense.
Yeah, so like I actually think that is a positive because you mentioned like I don't think a game needs to have like this complex story. Right. I didn't think it was overly complex. I guess maybe it's possible that I was just like I was not thinking about it as much, and I was just like, oh, that's cool, like that's interesting kind of thing. But I thought it was the perfect amount of story where it wasn't just like this constant barrage of like lore that would totally not make sense in a game.
Yeah.
And I think if it didn't have any of that, I still would have really liked this game.
Yeah.
But I think for me, that just elevated it to the end. And so like that, and this is my thing about the narrative, which is that last like maybe 20% of the game I thought was so much fun because you have the reveal that Ravenbeak is the father. You have that final boss fight, which I thought was pretty cool. We'll talk about like the combat and stuff like a little bit later. And then you have this essentially like an explosion of like energy. It seemed like, and then the X parasite takes over what you think is the remains of Ravenbeak to form this like bigger monster. And you're like, in my head, I was actually like, oh God, like that was kind of a difficult boss fight. I can't believe I'm gonna have to like do this again. But the mechanic of that was all you got to do is hold down the cannon. And so this like really coolly animated, really cool design Ravenbeak like X monsters like coming towards you, and you have that kind of like that first person like camera. It's just a full barrage cannon. You don't have to do anything. It's not like a timed event, and it's gone. And then it leads into what I know only because I've like read, which is like an escape sequence at the end of the game. There's like you have to like essentially go back through the whole map like quickly to get to your ship. Apparently all Metroid games had that. I didn't know that. They all have that. But I thought that
was fun. Yeah.
I thought that whole sequence was so much fun. And like I had a blast playing that. And I don't think...
But I didn't like the end part of the chase sequence where she gets into the ship and it's like, oh, you can't take off because Parasite is infecting you. And then Quiet Robe appears again.
Oh, yeah.
And is alive again somehow, kind of. And then it's like, oh, I'll fix it. And then it's over. And it's like, okay, so... I don't know. The reason I mentioned the 3 plot point thing is, and I mean it in the negative sense, is because I think what I mean by that is not that I think that this game should have had an overly complicated story. To your point, what I think is true is that this game maybe tried to have its cake and eat it too, and try to have like a big twisty turny plot point at the end when really you don't need anything like that in this game. However, I think what I mean more by the 3 plot point thing is that every time you get a plot beat in this game, it's like a big narrative swing that like twists the whole thing on its end, but there's no detail or nuance or anything like setting it up in between. It's just you've crash landed on this planet. You don't really get any story for a long time until you meet Quiet Robe, and then it's like giant lore dump about Metroids and what the nature of Ravenbeak is and why he is the way he is, and then you don't really get any story again for a long time until Ravenbeak comes back, and then I'm also your creator. And it's just like they're huge jumps in the story put into like very small, minute sections.
I think that I agree with you that they had like the very beginning of the game, a lot of exposition, lore dump or whatever, and then you get into it, you play a lot, and then you have the Quiet Robe, same thing essentially, and so it was kind of like a sloppy story in terms of like not giving it to you in like a well-paced way.
It painted with very broad brushstrokes.
And so, and I guess that's the thing is like that didn't bother me, and I think that's something to make clear for the record. Like, if I'm not mistaken here, Jack, you did not like the narrative. Robert, you loved the narrative. I, who hated this game, didn't have a problem with narrative. I was totally fine with it. I think had I gotten through to that plot point, I might have been more on Jack's side of things with it. But like, ultimately, like, for me, the narrative was fine. What brings this game down is the gameplay, which maybe can be a transition.
I think it's a good time. I'll just say, like, as like a last note about the narrative, that I hear what you're saying about like that it is. I won't make an argument that the lore dump or like exposition is very not heavy-handed, but like it's done in a big way periodically. Yeah. I think that if I was playing a game that was more narratively focused, I would have had an issue with that. Mm-hmm. But because the kind of game that it almost felt like I can't think of anything to really compare it with other than like, you know, you play, it's like it's a game, and then at the end of the act break you have this like story that is, you know, it's not playable in a lot of ways, it's just added. So I liked that. I thought it was a swing. I think it's different than most things. I wouldn't call it like sloppy, but I do understand why someone who, and I think this is both of you, like really values narrative in a game a lot. Like, is that an accurate like statement?
I definitely value narrative pretty highly, only because I just feel that there are, even a game like Animal Crossing, for example, it's the same thing. It's not like there's tons of plot beats or anything, but it's like simple and straightforward, but with just enough like nuance and flavoring and, you know, detail to make it compelling. Like, just you're moving away from home for the first time, you're moving to a new town, you know, you need to help Tom Nook open his shop, is usually part of it. It doesn't have to be overly complex. I'm not saying that I didn't like this narrative because it wasn't complex. I'm saying that it was reaching for something complex and didn't do it successfully by virtue of being super parsed down.
And I would, to answer to your point, I agree. I value the narrative a lot. The narrative in this game, for all the commentary I provided on that in this section and my thoughts on the narrative, has nothing to do with my score. I think is where I'm getting at.
Yeah,
like, it was fully fine.
It's hard to view the story in context of if you didn't get to the end. Like, it's hard to examine it.
Well, because I think that a lot of like the narrative was just muddled by the gameplay. And again, we'll get to this.
Because it's broken up. It's so long in between narrative sections. By the time you get to a cutscene, I've forgotten what has gone on between game sessions.
I mean, there's that 100%. I also think that, like, for example, one of my favorite tonal narrative parts of the game was the whole Emmy sequences, and I think by the end, even that, the gameplay of those Emmy sequences started to not age well, which kind of lowered that tonal thing for me as well.
Maybe we should get into gameplay.
Well, this is sort of, for me, like a structure and narrative kind of element too, which is a good transition. Which one of the things I really liked was the Emmys. Obviously, I think we all liked the Emmys, generally speaking. I think
generally speaking
is the best element of this game that felt unique, singular, fun at times, frustrating at others, but overall like a good addition to a game like this.
Yes, I would agree with that statement.
And I think the Emmys, and for anyone like listening who's not super aware, like the Emmys, like, you know, there's how many? There's like 9.
6 or 7. Yeah.
There's like
7.
There's like 6 or 7. There's like 9 planets or like sections of the game essentially, and there's maybe like 6 or 7. There's 7 Emmys that you're essentially
there they are.
Have to they're all different, like colored, and you get to a section of the game and it's kind of like it's almost like a sneak mission, right? In a lot of ways, like
the game tells you from the get-go you cannot defeat these things in combat. You have to stealth by them. You have to solve the puzzle basically. They have
different like mechanics. Like, some of them are really fast, some of them have scanners, some of them can freeze you and like stop you and stuff like that. So they all have like different elements, but the gist of it is like you cannot fight these things. You have to avoid them, and if they do catch you, you have a split-second moment to potentially avoid it. I don't know about you guys if you ever were able to do that.
I did it a couple times.
I will say
I did it like
I will say with no hesitation, loved that. I loved when you got caught that there was a very unclear way of getting out of it, and was very satisfying when I got it correct.
Yeah, totally. I thought that was like really solid.
Yeah.
But I think just generally speaking, I thought the Emmys were really cool. And what I really liked is there was the moment that we've talked about before, which was that they stopped them. Mm-hmm. They're incapacitated. You see that first one, and I remember playing it like, oh shit, like when I saw it, and then like, oh wait, no, it actually is frozen, because I think like probably everyone playing this game, it was frozen. You're like, I don't know, like I doubt that is. And so it was. You go through the game, and I don't know exactly where you got to the point, Jimmy, but spoiler alert, and like probably obvious, they end up getting turned back on as soon as what's his name dies. What's his name? As soon as Quirrell is killed, quote unquote. They get turned back on. But then what I really like is that so when they get turned back on, there's 3 or 2. Do you remember, Jack?
Don't remember.
I think there's either 3 or 2.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling like by time I got to the second to last one, I think there was maybe 2 after they get like 3 or 2. By the time I got to the second to last one, I had unlocked essentially all of the like movement gameplay abilities at that point. I can move fast. I can move continuous. So I actually felt like that second to last one was a breeze. Like I was rolling through that, and I was like, oh, I have like learned the skills. This thing which was terrifying to me at the beginning of the game is now easy. Let me go and let me like barrel through this. And then the very last one that you face is a cutscene kill, if I'm remembering correctly. Like you run up to it and it does get you, and then you have this sort of like almost like arcane energy that's flowing through you, which I feel like is revealed to be like the Metroid.
I have to back up now for a second because I completely forgot about how mad I was about that plot point, because it is like once again like not set up at all that there's gonna be this late in the game. She's got secret power in her hand that has nothing to do with anything you've played so far.
I love that.
But why?
Because the whole time you're knocked out with amnesia, you're getting all these like clues, like something's happening, and even that like kind of blue. Like, I don't know if they like name it or anything. I'll say that, and I think we probably all agree. I don't really care about the naming things of something. I don't think something needs to have like a strong name to be positive or whatever. I think like this mystery around it the whole time, and then this at the very end, this like full realization of Samus and Metroid's full potential and abilities through whatever reason that could possibly be, and able to take down this thing that was terrifying in like a quick snap. I thought that was really cool. I thought that like the structure of the Emmys, which this is like, we're talking right now about gameplay in terms of like structure and the puzzles and stuff. We have a lot more to say, obviously, but that I thought was a really good example of how the game progresses perfectly for me. I thought that
it's just such a break from the gameplay for me, because it's not an ability that you learn how to use. It's just a cutscene ability. It's only something you access in cutscenes. It's never like now you have special hand ability that you can bring into the gameplay. It's just the game saying you've done it.
Right, but I mean, there's a lot of different mechanics and either like weapons or movement kind of stuff that you gain throughout the entire thing. I'm fine if one of them is like you can't really use this, but it's cool kind of thing.
Sure, it just makes it so that, to your point about progression, where it's like you felt like at the end you were much more successfully navigating the Emmy zones, that is sort of like the climactic power, and you don't even have access to it as a player. It is. I do want to feel like I have agency over the story to a certain extent. Part of a video game is the illusion of agency. Like, obviously, we all know that this game has XYZ levels to be. Nobody's pretending like it's like an open RPG where you can like choose your own adventure, although there are games that have elements of that. And this is obviously not one of them. I just mean it felt weird to me that it was like kind of for no reason you sort of get this hand ability and beat the last Emmy, and then and again, I wasn't clear on the narrative significance. It's like her Metroid DNA. or something. Like,
yeah, and I guess
again, I wonder if it has something to do with the larger Metroid.
I hear what you're saying.
context.
I just think for me, that particular ability, I understand what you're saying, like wanting maybe like control or agency over it. But to me, I think that was less of a choice dictated by gameplay and more dictated by that cutscene. I thought was very cool. And so I think they were like, okay, we can either give this to the player and have it be like a button push, like a quick, what it was essentially I would assume would be like a quick time event kind of thing or whatever that you can carry, or we could mess around with the cinematic and the and sort of incorporate it that way. But I hear what you're saying. I totally understand.
That's the last thing I'll say about the narrative, I swear. But with the Emmy zones, what I will say is that I do agree with you that I do think the progression of the Emmys was really good. Mm-hmm. I felt that I was getting better at it each time. However, there was one Emmy towards the end. I think it was the blue one. There's the one that can track.
Oh, that was hard.
Is it the... Oh, no, it's the yellow one. Wait, no. I don't remember.
I think it was one of the blue ones, yeah.
There's one that can track you through walls.
Yeah.
And you have to use the invisibility. I think that my only big gripe about the Emmy zones was that the invisibility mechanic, at least for me, did not work super successfully.
I second
Adam tells you multiple times throughout the game that in order to escape the Emmys, you must make use of your phantom cloak, the invisibility suit or what have you. But there were multiple times. I wish I had been recording it so I could show like this to you guys. Yeah. But there were multiple times where I was invisible on the ceiling while the Emmy was crawling underneath me, and it would literally jump straight up into me. And it was just seemingly inconsequential.
I would add to that like gameplay wise, of all of my complaints that it will get into, I think the Emmy zones had the least of them. However, to your point, Jack, like there were times where like my strategy with Emmys just like didn't work, and it didn't feel necessarily fair. For example, there's a lot of spots in the Emmy zone that are like little one block, for lack of a better word, spots where you're supposed to hide in your morph ball. Yeah. Where I would like be running around or whatever, and Emmy would see me or hear me usually, because when you're not in the Phantom Cloak, doesn't matter how slow you're going, they can hear you and they will immediately go after you. Yeah. And so they would come and find me. I'd morph, go into that one block hidey hole. The Emmy would come through, they'd sniff around like you were mentioning earlier. Yeah. Super cool. Yeah. I think that's super cool, very intense. I had a number of just real close calls where I just slid and morphed in time to hide, and that was awesome. Yeah. And then it would just, the Emmy would just stick around there and like not ever let you go out. And there were times where I'm like, I'm literally stuck because you're just looping in a circle right where I need to be. And the second that you move, again, even if it's just a little bit, if you're not in the Phantom Cloak, they're on you again. And I felt like there was a few times, again, ultimately, if that was the only thing that happened, the rest of the game didn't have problems, which I had major problems with, I don't think I'd be complaining about it or even talking about it. But I do think there's a few times at the Emmys where I'm like, okay, this is not fun. It's just more frustrating because like this Emmy seemingly is like a god that cannot be bested. Also, too, did you guys ever have a moment where like, and I had this happen multiple times, where I'd like walk into the Emmy zone, the Emmy would be in front of me, and I was like, oh, I just have to walk out.
It happened like 4 or 5 times.
I have to restart. There's nothing I can do about it. Cannot get around, so I'll just try again to get a better load.
Well, because they have.
I turned the game off once before, and because I kept walking in and it was right there, and I turned the game off and then reset it.
Because that's like, what are you supposed to do in that scenario? There's nothing to do unless you get that 99.9%. Or the 0.1% chance that you deflect its thing.
So I think that when you leave the Emmy gates and come back in, it will mostly start in a couple of different places. Like it would be the same two, and then the Emmys have a path. And so to the both the visibility thing and the like trap thing though that you mentioned, I would argue that it is, for me, it felt more like an exercise in patience, which was really challenging at first. But when you figure out their paths, you know that they're going to go on that place, and you have to be invisible. Not only be invisible, but you have to be invisible in a specific place. And for the scenarios that you're talking about, I think those happen. And at first I was like, well, what am I supposed to do here? But to me, and I don't know if this was something that they intended for you to figure out or if it was just like I figured out, you do have to trigger them a little bit and get them to a different place and then go hide again.
Well, I think that this is a great thing to bring up, because that sounds like a mechanic or a strategy that how would you have any way of figuring that out without reading some sort of guide?
Yeah,
and
I
that
felt
happened in multiple places where it's like there is a part of this game, a strategy or a direction you're supposed to go that I have zero clue how you would figure out if you didn't have a walkthrough. And I think that's a problem. Like, I don't think a game should need a walkthrough.
I used, so just full disclosure, IGN has a walkthrough that I use sometimes for figuring out not how to beat an enemy, but how to navigate from like what's the next step, right? Because you use elevators to get to the next locations and stuff like that. There was maybe 2 times that I was like, I feel like I missed something, or like I'm going in circles and I can't figure out what to do. So I did use a guide a couple times, but for the particular circumstance that you're talking about, the Emmys, I didn't use a guide. And so like, it's not, I think it's not like clear cut necessarily, like it's not laid out to you. And maybe this was because like I had just played a game where there was like paths like that in an NPC or like an enemy, and I was just sort of like going off of that. But like it was something that I did figure out. So I would contest your like need a walkthrough thing, but I do understand how like if you didn't get it initially for a myriad of reasons that I don't think is necessarily like your fault, but like you just didn't get it. I understand how that would be frustrating.
Well, I will say that because I fall more on your side of it, Jimmy, what I will say is that I got through it. Like, I did finish the game, and this is one thing that will speak to like sort of my larger overall takeaway with this game is that whenever I did get through an Emmy zone, it didn't feel like it was because I got through it because I was rewarded for patience, thought, creativity. It felt like I got through because I got kind of lucky on that particular one through. It felt like a lot more often than not, I was I don't want to say punished because that sounds like it was like the game was like malicious, which I don't think it was. But there were more often than not, I was in a situation in the Emmy zone where I was getting cornered, like you said, where I couldn't find a way out, or I was invisible and it still hit me somehow, or decided to jump up onto the ceiling, right, even though I wasn't moving and was invisible, and that was what was frustrating to me, is that by the time I got through the Emmy zone, it just was like it was more of a relief than it was like a wow, I really like sat there and worked that out, and figured out the problem.
I would say as well that I did not finish the game, as we all know, but I didn't.
I just want to make you say it again.
I will just say, like, before I know I might cut you off. I honestly I don't think that changes like how you can talk about the game. Like, sure. Like you can maybe you can't say to like the end of the narrative or whatever, but I think you played enough that you could like for anyone
enough Emmy zones.
Yeah, for anyone who's like credibility, like I think that's bullshit. Like I think you put enough time to have like anyways.
And my point too was that like I didn't not finish this game because of the Emmys.
Right.
Like I got through it, and I think if I didn't have my other complaints, maybe I don't even mention this like handful of times where the Emmy zones felt like a little like weirdly balanced or weird to get to or whatever. Like I think ultimately the Emmy zone is my favorite part, which is telling considering I had a couple of notes on it.
So I think, and this leads into something that I think you, Jimmy, want to talk about with the gameplay, but like I disagree with you in the Emmy zone, and Jack, I think I always felt when I beat a boss, when I got through an Emmy zone, I always felt like I had done it enough times. I had died, gone through whatever enough times, and by the end I was like, oh, I understand how to do it now. Like I've learned the paths, I've learned the mechanics, I learned the strategy. So I was left it challenged, and I felt like, I left it. I know what to do. Now it's calculated. And there's like always going to be like a little bit of like luck in something like this, just generally speaking. But I always felt like I had learned the skills to do it, and that's not you didn't learn the skills to do it kind of thing, in more just like the way that I interpreted the challenge, which I think is, we'll talk about difficulty later.
Bosses, I agree with you on the bosses. I felt they were well designed and
hard disagree.
Well, I felt like I felt like by the time I got to the end of the bosses, I understood the goal, like how I was supposed to take them down. It's just with the Emmys, because they are like there is like a random. I mean, I know there's like a path, but there is like a slightly randomized element because of the fact if if you trigger them,
you can trigger them to
they
break their
can,
path.
They
Yeah,
move
totally.
to you.
Yeah.
It just made it. I really got sick of seeing that damn cutscene every time where they catch you.
Oh yeah.
I just was like, by the end of it, I was just so like, if I watched this scene one more time.
Something about that, I really liked it every time.
I liked it every time as well.
And actually, Shelby noticed a few times. My girlfriend, because we at the lads.
Yeah, just
but she.
I was gonna say we all have girlfriends and full-time jobs.
I don't. For the reader out there, I don't have a full-time job or a girlfriend. But I did have a full-time job and a girlfriend before the accident. No, just kidding. I did have a full-time job, but not anymore.
But there's a few moments though before where like Shelby walked through and like noticed and Emmy get me, and her reaction was my reaction, which was always one of like. It was very there's a word that I'm looking for, but it was very like intense, hardcore. Like the Emmy stabs you through the face, and I thought that
brutal.
That brutal, like, and again, she'll walk through and be like, "Oh my gosh!" Like for a Nintendo game or whatever. And so I enjoyed that. I really like the Emmys. I think that my gameplay issues with them were small compared to others.
I would agree. It was definitely my favorite part for sure. Just towards the end, got a little tiresome.
You said something that actually stood out to me. Wait, you corrected yourself on punishment, like that you felt like you were being punished.
I just feel like the game isn't intending for that. It just felt like
no. I actually think it is, but I think that's good. And I don't know if that's like the masochistic of me, but I think it is punishing you, and I think it is so deliberately challenging. It is hard. I think most people will agree that this is like a hard game, and I know that we'll talk about like general difficulty in a second, but like this is potentially a good transition. The Chozo guards are right. They're called the Chozo guards.
Chozo guards, yeah.
I think that like there's a lot that's like is essentially they don't call it this, but like it's a mini boss, right? I think is that like a proper way to just like so like every once in a while you would come across this section of a map where you would be locked into this room and you had to beat them essentially, right? Like most of the time that's what it was, and it was sort of like a mini boss.
It's sort of a boss battle, but not like fully fleshed out. Just like they're more like
not like an end of the thing like big cutscene or whatever. But you would have these things, and I know we've talked about like going through it multiple times and feeling like it was like punishing and stuff like that. But I always finished it being like, oh, I get it now.
Robert, what's that number?
20. What's that number? For the record, Jimmy has a note up that says 21, which I know is referring to the amount of times it took him to beat one of the Chozo guards.
It took me 21 times.
Into that, I would say rookie shit, rookie numbers.
So, okay, let's get into it, because this is my main thing. And for anyone listening and for the lads with me at the table, this is you're either going to hear this and be like, oh, I get your point and I agree with you, or you're going to be like, I disagree, and then at this point, my opinion isn't going to change your opinion. But I think that this game started with such fun boss battles.
I'm sorry. I feel your passion. It's
gonna
like picking up on the
thing.
mic. Yeah, I know.
Up.
Let the record show. Jimmy's trying to break through the table on the mic.
My grandmother's table. I inherited after she died.
Hands off the table. This game started with such fun boss battles.
Yeah.
I believe the name was like the two that I'm thinking of were like such perfect like Zelda style boss battles where they were very cool set pieces and fun puzzles that you had to learn the strategy for to beat. It was the sea monster one.
Yeah.
And then the dragon one, I think its name is Kraid or whatever.
Yeah. It was in the lava.
The
right?
lava one and the underwater one.
Yeah.
We all know which ones those two are. Those were great. For the record, I did those like 8 times a piece or whatever. And those boss battles, after every failure, I learned something that was then applied in the next go around. For example, I felt like a sincere sense of gratification when I learned for Kraid, the lava beast thing, that like you were supposed to shoot some of the projectiles and just dodge those, and then he would fire the 3 darts into the wall that you were supposed to like scale up to the top and hold on so you could actually shoot him where it hurts. Yeah. Brilliant. Thought that was great because the first time you go in there, you have no idea what to do. Right. And so you have to observe that process and then learn that you can jump on those different levels to get to where you need to go. Same with the underwater boss, like many times where I'd like avoid some of the things and then I'd get an opportunity to like use the grappling hook up on top of the ceiling. And I'd go up there and I was like, great, I figured it out. That's what you have to do. But then you realize that you're going so slow across the top and that, you know, by the time you get halfway through, the main monster has woken up and is hitting you again. So it's like, okay, what do I have to... Oh, then I realize I have to like hit the generator first and then grapple up. Yeah. It was a perfect system where you had to play it a few times to learn... the puzzle or the strategy to beat it. And once you did, you would beat it. Maybe it'd take you 2-3 more times to like string it all together, but you knew what to do. There's a moment in this game where they abandon all thought and all creativity and all interest in putting together like rewarding boss battles. And I think that the Chozo guards are emblematic of it, because there is no puzzle there. There's nothing to be figured out. There is no strategy to learn. And in fact, should you try and use a strategy you think you learned, they will punish you for it. I know I've been talking for a bit now, but if you'll give me just a few more seconds. When you first beat the first Chozo guard, one of the things that you have to do is like, it has that like counter attack. It's like the one attack that it can do that you can counter.
With a little like white flash that indicates that you can counter.
The parry mechanic.
Yeah. And there is, that's essential to beating. You have to be able to parry it. It's the only way you can really damage the things. Yeah. There's another way that you can trigger one of those counter moves when you, and I wish I knew the name of the attack, but like there's a moment where you can slide under one of the long shot attacks, and it will immediately trigger a counter. So I learned that from the time that you battle the first Chozo guard. And when you go and battle 2 of them, if you slide under, it does not trigger the counter attack. And that to me was such a piss off, because it's like, here I am trying to apply knowledge that I gained in a previous fight, and now all of a sudden they're just not doing it. And I think that to me was like so annoying, because it's like, what happened to the interesting, creative, and strategic fights? Now it's just... Can you get your Joy-Con to fucking work as you're jumping across the map? I would be curious to know your thoughts.
I agree with you. I think
thank you for allowing me that moment.
No, I agree with you, but let's let the defense get in there.
Yeah, I totally disagree. I think so.
Did you play the game?
My favorite thing about this whole conversation is that it's like one person goes like through an impassioned, like thoughtful, logical argument, and despite whatever side I'm on, I'm like, yeah, I see your point, and then the other person goes, I completely disagree.
I had like.
What was the lesson or the strategy?
No, I have to get in here.
What was the lesson or strategy in those Chozo guards?
I hear exactly what you're saying. So I will make one distinction first. Sure. Is that I don't think that the Chozo guards should be held to the same standard as the bosses at the end of a map. Because I think that they're designed to be a different kind of thing. The bosses use particular gameplay mechanics and different they have unique attacks that need to have that, like, you never use those individual strategies at any point at any time other than the game. I don't think you're supposed to. I think like that's just, it's meant for that. It's meant for these cutscenes and stuff. I agree with you. I do think that continued through the rest of those like big boss battles throughout the entire game. I felt like that was always there for me, and that I had that like moment. But with the Chozo guards, they're meant to me not to use the strategies in a individualized setting, but more use the strategies that you did with the minion enemies throughout the rest of the map. So it's not like you weren't going to employ the same strategy to the Chozo guards every single time you face them. By the time you got to the next Chozo guard, like, because this happened, like, I don't know exactly how many times you faced Chozo guards, maybe like 5-6 times or something like that. Is that Jack? I mean, I
don't remember. I mean, it definitely. Well, okay. There's also, we should mention, there's a distinction because there's Chozo guards and Chozo soldiers. And I believe this one that you're looking at, the one with the longer spears, the soldiers.
Sure.
And the one that you had the 21 times, which for the record, it took me 19 tries, so it was also quite high for me.
Yeah.
Those I think were the guards.
Right. I know what you're talking about. So there was this.
Yeah,
sorry.
no. It's just, all I mean is that there is like a slight distinction, at least for me, because I did find the soldiers to be slightly more engaging, just because
soldiers were in the smaller rooms.
They were smaller, and they would
like jump on. They would jump on the walls, do that, and they eventually got infected by X, if I'm remembering correctly.
Much more of a.
I totally forgot about that.
Much more of a pattern to those guys, and a little bit more of a like employable strategy. I think what I really agree with you with is that with the Chozo guards, it felt lazier to me because you face one of them. The first encounter you have, you face one in one room, and it's hard.
It was very hard.
It's already hard with one, and
didn't have a lot of fun with that one.
It was tough. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And then a couple of worlds, levels later, you face two of them, and I remember walking into the room and being like, "Oh God!" Like, one was hard, like now I have to do two, and that was the one that took you 21 tries, me 19. And then there's another one later on where you face two again, and
the thought of that is insane.
I totally like. Okay, so thank you for making the distinction between the guards and the soldiers, because I would say the soldiers, which is the ones in the like more dedicated room that had that pattern, that I would definitely equate more on the level of like the big boss, whereas there's a specific pattern in there that they're going to use that only happens in that room, and like that's the only thing that you face in there. But in the guards, you even said like it happens 2 realms later, 2 realms, worlds, whatever. I don't know what distinction they're making, like parts of the map later. You've likely gained a few different either like weapons, movement strategies, things like that. And so I felt like those were more like, okay, like the big bosses or the soldiers, where it's like you're adapting based on the specific movements that they're doing that are unique to these specific enemies and characters, whereas the Chozo guards, you're not really caring about like their individual or unique attacks, because they weren't really unique or individual. You're dealing with all of the new combat mechanics, weapons, strategies that you have. And it was a little bit more chaotic and less like patterned and structured. But I think I always felt like, oh, how do I use the new skills that I have to avoid it? It's a lot of evading. It's definitely a game.
My issue is not so much what you're saying. My issue is that what I take with it is that it's repetitive.
Yeah.
It's you do each of these things, like between the Chozo soldiers and the Chozo guards, I mean, it's like 9 or 10 encounters, and it's repetitive, and that's more my issue, is that it's like they are hard and fast stopping points, which I do think needs to be pointed out, because we can distinct them all we want between being a boss and not being a boss, but it's ultimately a stopping point. You can't do something else. You have to get through this battle, which is kind of a defining factor.
Well, that's kind of my point too. Again, with all due respect for the point that you just outlined, Robert, like in terms of the mini boss versus the boss or whatever, I kind of like. It doesn't even matter to me. That doesn't matter, because you have to beat them. They feel like boss moments because they're the only enemies in the room, and they're given like a little setup, you know. And
it's different than I totally agree. It's different than a normal enemy. I'm not trying to make that comparison.
But it's like you go from like the Kraid and the sea monster or whatever, and even like there's like a hermit crab in the beginning that was kind of interesting too. But you go from like those that are like very like fun, to go back to the stupid hermit crab for a second. It like goes invisible at one point, you know. Like
cinematic, maybe.
Cinematic,
totally
super
agree.
fun.
Yeah.
And then it's just like they stopped doing that. And I don't doubt that at the end they probably had another one with Ravenbeak or whatever, but like all of a sudden it's like they just scrapped those fun encounters and started doing 1 Chozo guard, 2 Chozo guards,
1 Chozo soldier, 2 Chozo soldier.
But yes, that flying bug one as well that they throw into you. I mean, there was like probably I don't know. I played 10 hours. 5 hours of gameplay where the fun boss is not there, and it seemed like every time you had a stopping point, it was one of these gauntlets that really reminded me of like, this is the equivalent of like doing those insane Mario Maker runs where it's just like there's one way to get through it. And if you don't do
those
it,
Mario Maker levels that have like a 0.1 success rate.
Yeah,
or whatever.
well, and it just like, and the thing is like, if you want to say as well that it's not meant to be like a grand strategy, it's meant to be evading and using your new weapons, then to that I'd say like the Joy-Con made that completely random if it would ever work or be effective in terms of like evading and stuff. The amount of times that I jumped on a wall trying to get the double jump thing to activate and would just hit the fucking wall and then drop down the Chozos and beat the shit out of me. Like, yeah. And again, we can split hairs as to whether that's like Metroid's fault or the Switch's fault, but like they made the game for the Switch, and if I can't use the Switch to play the game, then like at a certain point, like I think
what did make the gauntlet of those bosses, not bosses, the Chozo guards, quite difficult was that, and we haven't talked a lot about it, but like there's a lot of stuff getting mapped to buttons in this game, and it's rather the damaging is rather unforgiving in this game, so it really doesn't allow for like a slip of the finger or like an accidental whatever. I think I mentioned briefly at one point that one of the things that I thought was kind of unnecessary was the fact that you have to time the double jump right in order to get it to work.
Yes.
And it was just it's just little things like that make those gauntlets somewhat unfun, because it's a really unforgiving challenge, which is not necessarily a bad thing by itself, but the mechanics are hard. There's a lot going on, and it just doesn't make a perfect setup for a fun time so much as it does set up quite a difficult challenge, which is not always what I look for in my favorite games.
But and I don't know if we're ready to talk about just difficulty in general right now. I have a couple more things.
We're dancing around.
I feel like I have the only other thing I want to say in terms of like structure and gameplay and stuff is something that I really enjoyed that we didn't get a chance to talk about, but was one of my favorite parts. So I'd be remiss not to mention it. Is I thought that the general progression, and I'll actually talk about this a little bit more in my write-up, but the general progression in terms of like learning the mechanics and the different weapons and stuff, not for the sake of combat, but in terms of like navigating the levels, I thought was really cool. Getting the suit to be able to go in this new place and having to like backtrack to be able to like, oh, like great, now I have this new thing and I can shoot through this door and I can explore this level. And it felt like every time I got to there, I got a new ability that could help me traverse the space. I thought was really... When I see a game like this, and this is not have been the case 10 years ago, but most video games overwhelm me. If I start a new video game, I'm like, I'm not getting through this. There's just like too much going on with the game. I'm not going to be able to get through this. But in this particular instance, I felt like with a couple of small exceptions, I felt like the way that they manipulated you to go in the right direction was shocking to me. I would be to the point I was like, I can't believe in this web of a map that I actually ended up going to the right spot and I don't know how they did that necessarily, but I just think it's really solid level design. And I thought that is in terms of like structure gameplay, that was like a standout for me.
It's funny you mentioned that, and I will say that like it mostly worked for me, but ultimately what got me to finally put the game down was a map issue where like I was pushed.
Really? That's what happened?
Well, it's not. It was really the Chozo guards took the life out of me.
I
was
had
like
this vision in my head of you entering the second double Chozo room.
I didn't even know it had
throwing the Joy-Con through the television.
That's a much more interesting story, and we can go with that officially. But
I never asked. My fault.
Listen, it was like the Chozos, dropped me in combat, and then
also double Chozo room is going to be the next Taco Bell. A double Chozo. Sorry.
Doritos Locos Chozo.
Yeah.
There it is. Anyway, I felt like overall like the map design was okay, but I wasn't quite as enamored as you were, Robert, with the like getting a weapon to backtrack, because one, I felt like they oftentimes didn't. I mean, at least in my experience, I felt like they didn't telegraph well enough that you were supposed to backtrack. There's a few times where like I got lost and didn't know where to go, and then read a walkthrough that said, "Oh, you got to go back to the first planet." I'm like, how would I have ever known to do that? And it wasn't as simple as like, oh, now I can go into lava rooms and there's a lava room in that planet. It was like something more mundane. But anyway, I don't know. I guess I don't have too much to add on other than I had a number of points where I was stuck, and the thought, like I read on the walkthrough where to go, and the thought of like, oh god, I gotta go all the way from there to that point of the map was, to use Jack's main point, like not fun. I did not look forward to it, and it bummed me out.
But see, so when that happened to me, usually what happens is if you have to backtrack because like and backtrack is maybe not even. Well, I guess that's a fine word. But like you beat some sort of like enemy, or you like you killed the enemy and you got whatever power from that. You had to backtrack. Chances are, on your way back, you would encounter something new. Maybe that would be a Chosen Guard, and maybe in that situation for you, that would be tedious more than anything. But for me, it felt like it mixed it up. I always felt like when I was exploring, and then, there might be a couple people that say, like, if I had to use a guide in the first place, then that's a flaw in the game, just generally speaking. I don't know, and this kind of, like, ties into difficulty a little bit. I think that, like, I like most games, I'm putting in a normal setting now, right? Versus in the past, I might have not. I might have gone for the hard. I don't really care about that kind of thing. If I have to use a guide, I don't really care. I might just chalk it up to being like, maybe I was stupid this time, or maybe this like worked, or maybe it didn't. I could understand someone saying that means it's a flaw of the game itself. But for me, I always felt, for the most part, like engaged, like going back to certain situations. But I think perhaps that's a great bridge into, like, generally speaking, like difficulty, because that is like a huge point of contention for this game, not only between us three, but in the general community. I actually spent Google, is Metroid Dread too hard? I did that a couple times.
When I Googled the synopsis for this, the first thing that comes up was like, is Metroid Dread hard?
I saw a bunch of people talking about it, longtime Metro fans, never played Metroid fans, and everything in between, questioning, is this game too hard? And I think that's something that, like, you both think is, and I kind of do, but kind of don't. And so I guess I'd rather hear from one of you first. Like, what are your thoughts on just the general difficulty of this game specifically?
This is the like sum up of what my write-up will be. Is there have been other games that we've played that I feel have been equally hard, if not harder. The problem for me with this game is not so much about just the difficulty, even though I do think it is a pretty hard scale. It's that it's not something about the way that the difficulty works in this game makes it not fun to play. It's not so much about if the actual challenge of the game, because again, like, I hate to just like bring it back to this milestone, but it's like, I did finish it. It wasn't that it was so hard that I could not physically finish it, and I'm sure that you could have eventually finished it, Jimmy, had you kept playing and maybe like quit your job to like focus on this like I did. But
I don't think that necessarily means, that doesn't negate the point. Like, I mean, just to compare it to something else, like I've finished a meal that I thought was terrible just because I just wanted to finish it or whatever. That doesn't make the meal any better or whatever. Like, so I think that just because you finish it is not in the camp of like, oh, it's fine.
Right. No. That's what I mean is that it's not, the difficulty wasn't so that I couldn't finish the game. The reason I take issue with the difficulty of this game was because it was set at a scale for me that made the game actively not fun. Yeah. Because it's really a lot of my focus on difficulty in games is the unforgivingness. I don't want to immediately talk about comparisons, but like with Hades, when you die in Hades, it's a very hard game and you die a lot, there's always a buff, a reward for dying. You get stronger, you get new abilities, you get whatever, you get story beats. With this, it's more of a traditional video game. You die, you get put outside the room. There's nothing fun about that. So like and because this game it's not fun to lose. It's just not. And when you lose and you go back to the same spot and you just have to keep hitting your head against the wall and keep trying, when the game is also unforgiving and you end up dying a lot because the Emmys are one-hit kills, and with very few rare exception, A lot of the Chozo guards deal huge damage. If you get hit by one of those 3 spike things that lava monster boss hits, if you get hit once, it basically brings you down into the danger zone, even if you're at full health, because I experienced that. And it'll only take one more hit from almost anything else to knock you out.
Yeah.
In a 2D side scroller where you're dodging lots of projectiles and stuff, it's not an easy task. It's very that's what my issue was, is that between the fact that it's very unforgiving in terms of losing and the fact that when you do lose, there's no there isn't any. I mean, not that every game has to have a Hades twist or something where you're losing, you get buffed or whatever or something, but then it just makes it repetitive and then it's unforgiving. So you're just going and you're dying. I go and I die. I go and I die. I go and die. And when you're wasting an hour doing that, it's just not fun. And so that makes it hard.
To add on, and not to sound so pretentious, but as someone who's busy or whatever, that's kind of what it came down to for me, is do I really want to spend the hour I have a day, if that I am able to play video games, to try a boss fight 21 times in a row with no variation in that fight at all, just doing the same thing. And obviously, ultimately, I decided no. But I think I think that the Hades comparison is interesting because, again, the Hades gives you enough variation in what you're doing. I also just think that that game is vastly superior in the control scheme and all that. Because I think with the difficulty,
we could turn this into just a. So yeah, I would rather just talk about Hades.
Yeah, well, that's so funny because I think. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No,
finish the thought.
I think gosh, the control scheme in this game was so bad, and I think, just to echo your point, Jack, the boss is so unforgiving. Again, the Doritos Trozos Locos or whatever, they could hurt you 21 different ways. And you could do one thing, fire a rocket at them or whatever, and it's I hate
that the regular, most bosses, the regular blast doesn't work.
Regular blast doesn't work.
Do the rocket.
Right, regular blast doesn't work. You have to do the rocket, which means you're not moving. You have to hold down a weird trigger combination where you're also aiming at the same time.
Yeah,
which was just terrible. I think that was awful. And I'll give you a chance to respond, Robert. I promise. But I think it was terrible. Throw in a couple of times where I might be having a good run and then my double jump doesn't trigger, or the wall jump doesn't trigger, or I jump and I skim the head of a Chozo guard and it does damage to me. It didn't even fucking attack me, but I skimmed it by a hair.
Yeah,
and
the
it
Chozo guards have that attack too with the where it's not the one that you can counter, but the red
one, and you can't. Well, you can jump over, but it's much taller.
It's very hard to get the timing right of that jump, if you can't get away to one side of the screen, if the other one is there, it makes it nigh impossible to dodge. So you're just assuming that you just have to build in for at least 1 or 2 hits, which are they bring you down a lot.
Yeah, I think, and this is not scientific, I didn't track this, but I'm pretty sure that I was able to get hit 5 times before dying in that double Chozo guard room.
You have, there's different, and I don't think this matters too much, but you do have level, you gain more health obviously as the game goes on, and in theory you could backtrack a little bit, search for more health and go back. I think that's bad. I will say I never did that. I never got to a point where I was I was having such a struggle.
A lot of health. I had 700 whatever. It was a lot. It was just the attack scale right along with you, so it kind of becomes moot.
So it's so funny because all this stuff you're saying, I agree with the stuff you're saying, but I love that. I love how
for punishment.
I love how impossible it is, and when you talk about it's not fun to go back and repeat it over and over again. I joked kind of joked a little bit earlier and said that 21 was rookie numbers. I kind of not a joke. I love that. I think that is such a that to me feels so classic video games, and So I will say that I don't think the game was too difficult as it is. I will say that based on what you said, and I know you've said this is not the case a lot of times, but it just sounds like this isn't the kind of game that you like that. Like, you don't like that.
No, I don't. I will say that I am, I love myself, and I value my time, and
I totally understand that. But I think that's kind of what it comes down to. Is my point is that this is just not your genre, and I hear you on some of the mechanics.
My counter argument is Hades again.
I think that is not a fair comparison.
I'm not saying that they're the same games, but I think
in terms of repetition,
in terms of a difficult game, the difficulty maybe is different in terms of how it's thrown at you. But I don't think it's that different if you're to zoom out on the video game landscape.
In terms of like difficulty, or like
in terms of difficulty. And also just the type of game it is. It's a little like a Zelda or a Kena.
It's a little arcadey. It's arcadey.
Yeah.
I'll totally give you that. But I do think a really important distinction is that in Metroid, when you die, like you just said, you go back a little bit. Hades, when you die, you go back to the very beginning. And so because you go back to the very beginning, because it's roguelike or roguelite. There's the two. I forget the distinction. There's roguelike and roguelike.
Because it's not a true roguelite, a roguelite would be like you start back with nothing.
Yeah, roguelike you gain things, or like Returnal I think is like a roguelike, which
Returnal is actually I feel like more honestly I felt it was a misnomer for them to call it a roguelike because there are some perma upgrades with that game, but you're basically starting from scratch.
But regardless, I think that that's an important distinction with Hades. Hades is not a game of repetition. I think Hades is a game of I mean, you do repeat by nature of the game, but I think that like Metroid is more so a game of repetition in the terms of difficulty because you are facing the same thing over and over again. With Hades, I forget the name of it, but the Minotaur essentially, which is at the end of the third realm or something like that. That was harder than anything I ever did in Metroid for me, and it was really a pain in the ass for me, not in a negative way necessarily, but because when you died there, you went all the way back to the beginning and you spent a lot of time going up to that, and then you would get it and you may have to feed it again. And that's what made Hades harder to me. Metroid was easier because I could just do the same thing over again, which I really liked.
I guess what I appreciate about Hades is that it found a way to make a formula based on repetition still feel like new every time, even though it is repetitive by design. Whereas Metroid, and again, I'm not saying that games like Metroid should aspire to have roguelike elements because that's crazy.
Yeah.
All I mean is that if your game is not a roguelike, and if it's going to have, what I'm trying to get at, sorry, I lost my words there, but the repetition of Metroid is not negated by anything, and yet they still set it up with a difficulty level that makes it so repetitive.
And I think that,
and so that's my problem.
Yeah, I think, I mean, and this might not be a whole conversation, but maybe just a difference of opinions, but I also think that like the repetition part of Metroid where it's like, oh, you start outside the room. Like there was a number of, in fact, I think every time you're not right outside the room. You're like 30 seconds away, and you usually have to do a couple hop, skips, and jumps and stuff, and maybe even potentially take damage.
Oh yeah, there was one where I kept falling in the lava on the way over to the boss room, and I was getting so mad.
So like, it was just enough to like really just be like kicking sand in your face when you're down, where it's like, oh, you're gone, and now you gotta watch the entire boss cutscene again, and that's the thing is like, well, you could say that you have to do a lot of stuff with the Hades repeats, but it's always new and interesting, and this is just literally the same thing.
Yeah, and see, I like that. And I've played lots of games like that.
Yeah.
And so here's something I'll say that I think we can probably all agree on is that like
we'll say about that.
I don't think Metroid was too hard. I thought like I've played a lot of games from the era of like say the original 2D side scroller of Metroid. I will say pretty definitively that I've probably played a lot more of those types of games than both of you have, just generally speaking. And so in that sense, I think perhaps this is just more my game than it is your game. But I will say that I am bummed that you weren't able to finish it because of difficulty. And I do think that while I don't think that's a flaw in the design of this game and that makes it a bad game by the way that it is, I will go against what I think a lot of people think, which is that I do think there should be a toggle for difficulty setting. I do think that like I think we've talked about this a lot, but I do think it's annoying and a nuisance, and it's annoying. I'm repeating myself. When there's like an easy, medium, hard, ultra hard, whatever. I don't think that makes sense to me. I think there's if you need to do something like that, I think that's a critical flaw in the game, that you're just scaling it up usually to be more difficult. I don't like that. I think all games should have normal and story, or like some sort of like variation of that, or normal and like story mode, where there is a designed game and then a game and then one that is made easier. So I think I don't know. We've talked about this a lot. I don't know if there should be a consideration for barrier of entry.
Well, yeah, I guess this circles back around to my opening statement about, like, if you want to play a game, should you be able to play a game? I also would very friendly and amicably but firmly push back on the idea that this isn't my type of game. And I think that we talked about this before our podcast here or whatever, that's one of the things that made me so emotional about this, is like I kept having this like thought in my head, that voice in the back of my head that said, oh, well, this just isn't your type of game. And to that, Jack said it earlier, to that I would say, no, Hades was hard. I loved it. I persevered. I tried. I went into this game knowing full well it was going to be difficult, and I wanted to play it. And I think that there are mistakes that the game made in development, in creation, in design, and whatever, that made it so I couldn't finish the game. Me personally, and we can agree to disagree, that's totally fine. I don't think it's fair to say that, well, you just had more experience with this type of game, and that it is just not my type, Jimmy's type of game.
I don't think it's like I had more experience and that made me like better at it. I say more like I had experience because I have more experience because this is the kind of game that I like. Have you played a game minus maybe some like Mario game or something like that? Like, have you really played games like this before?
I mean,
or are you a fake gamer?
Like a 2D sprites. They don't really exist as much anymore. Like Oddworld recently, which I played, and I didn't really like that much. But have you played games like this before?
So, I mean, honestly, no. Short answer, no. Long answer, I feel like that's an interesting point, because like, no, I haven't, but I wanted to like this game, and I went into it.
You gotta but you have to start with some kind of 2D platform.
Just because you wanted to like it doesn't mean that you. That's my point. I don't think. I just think that this is just not your genre game. I would imagine if you played the Oddworld games, you probably wouldn't like it for the same reason. I'd imagine if you play some of like the new Super Mario Bros. Games, you might not like it.
I played those before though.
The 2D the new ones, like the ones for like the Wii U or like the Switch or whatever.
No, but how different are they?
They're a little bit different from like the original Mario games. I would say this is probably
like the Wii 2D.
I played the
Mario.
Super Mario Brothers, like the 4-player one.
On the Wii.
Yeah,
I played that. I enjoyed it.
I finished it. Yeah. I loved it.
Yeah.
Well, I guess my point is that like this. I'm not saying it's not your kind of game because it's too difficult. I'm just saying like all the stuff you're talking about, where it's like, oh, like you have to repeat it and you just die all over again, and that kind of stuff. That's, I guess, what I'm saying is that like I love that, and I can understand why you don't like that, but I don't think that means it's a flaw in the game design.
Here's my rebuttal. I did like it when it was done well, and the reason I know that is because the beginning of this game does it well, and then they stopped doing it.
But my rebuttal to that is that I think they didn't stop. I felt like that my experience.
Vote in the comments.
My experience with it is that the stuff that you talked about liking through the game continued with me for the rest of the game, and I don't know why. I don't know why. I hear what you're saying, and it's obviously. Art is subjective. A lot of this kind of stuff, I think there's objective merits generally speaking. We can talk about graphics or whatever, but I think that it's interesting. I
want to pose an interesting wrinkle, which is that something is occurring to me because we made the comparison about like Super Mario Brothers and stuff, which is that I feel that I've played some Super Mario Brothers games that are like side scrollers, and it's like the whole point of the game, to your point, Robert, is that it's like you have to repeat over and over and over again and try to get the level right. But like the narratives of those games are like. It's like silly. It's just like, oh, beat Peach, It's just to beat it for the sake of beating it, but it's not this thing of where like I'm cut off from elements of the game because I couldn't progress farther. It's like I get the whole game from one level. With something like Metroid, which is trying to tell like a story to an extent and has sort of an arc to it and is part of a long-running franchise where the narrative is developing, I think it should be held to a slightly different standard than something like a Crash Bandicoot or something, or like, which I know is not always 2D or wait, do they even have any 2D ones, Crash Bandicoot?
No, it's all 2.5D.
Well, platformers, for example.
Like platformers. Yeah, I actually think Crash is a much better comparison to Metroid than Hades.
Totally. I just the reason I bring it up is because I just think that Metroid weirdly fits, specifically Metroid Dread, fits into a slightly different category because it is part of like an ongoing saga, and there's like storytelling elements, and there is like, you know, it says in the official description that this is a sequel to Metroid set after the events of Metroid Fusion.
Yeah.
So like it is part of a longer, grander narrative, and I think that should be taken into account because if you're someone who's trying to get into the Metroid franchise, or if you're someone who is curious about Samus as a character or whatever, this is a high barrier to entry. Whereas a Super Mario Brothers game, even if it is too hard to like ever beat fully, you know, maybe you still have like some fun. You know, they're party games.
Sure.
It's like,
yeah. I mean, they're very different games in a lot of ways. We've talked about it's very hard to compare video games to video games unless they're like in the same franchise. Like in a lot of ways, it's a difficult thing to do. Subjectivity is like again. I think I've had a much harder time with some Mario games than I've had with Metroid. Yeah. I just recently played the most recent Crash Bandicoot game, which I thought was way more challenging than Metroid in like a really, and I like a lot of the stuff you're saying, I felt very similarly about Crash, where I was like, this is just designed poorly and it is really frustrating. But I guess like because that wasn't my experience with this game, I would that's the only counter that I have to your.
Isn't it interesting when each of us are bad at a game, the game is fundamentally designed poorly?
Well, that's like kind of, and I'm not saying you're like bad at this game or like this types of game, but I do think that like by nature of the fact that like that I didn't have that experience, I would use that as the counter to your like it is just designed bad, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, again, I wish like I could like record gameplay footage to show
totally.
Like again mechanics not working in the game for me. I don't know.
That's a separate conversation. Like, because like as we mentioned at the beginning, I use the Pro controller. I've always had issues with my Joy-Con. I think that if that's the timing, because I didn't really think about that obviously because I didn't really have that issue. If that's a problem. That if that was a problem that you had with the controller, like not to like, oh, it's the controller's fault or whatever, but I know how the Joy-Cons are. That's an issue too. Like then it should be designed for the Joy-Con.
If it was simply a controller issue, then I don't think I would be as harsh on that. I think the controller was just like the cherry on top, where it's like it's already, I think again, I've said it. I'm not trying to like throw dirt onto the wound or whatever, but like because I do think it is poorly designed. After a certain point in that game, when you throw in a couple of deaths that are because of the shitty controls, like
so frustrating.
That was just so annoying.
Yeah.
Again, an hour and a half in, 20 tries in, and then I'm doing well, and I hit the wall and don't jump off of it or whatever. Like that's what gets frustrating.
Totally. And there's like a million things going behind the scenes of a video game. Like I don't know anything about game development or something like that. But that happens all the time. Totally.
Just for the sake of like my own closure on this this topic here. So like my main thing, what I've been waiting to talk about, is that point that I think is valid, where there's a very clear point in this game where they stop being creative and clever with the bosses, and it's just rigorous for the sake of rigorous. Your argument to that, if I'm not mistaken, is that they are meant to be different experiences.
I think that the main bosses that we talk about in the like at the end of each like section or whatever, I don't think they stopped the creativity. I think they always had some sort of element to that. To me, I think maybe it got a little more challenging, and I definitely preferred some over the others. Like maybe I really like that lava one. I think that might have been my favorite boss in the whole game potentially. But I will say that I do think that the one of the biggest challenges that you had, and me too, I thought the Chozo guards are probably harder than some of like the main bosses as well. I think they just operate in a different kind of way. I think that they personally, I didn't hold them to the same standard as the main bosses. They just felt different to me. Like it felt like a mini boss, and I think the reason we're calling them a mini boss because there's some sort of distinction. Though, again, I understand what you're saying, that you can't go past it, so it's a barrier of entry, and so that's frustrating, and I totally get that. But I do think that, like, I wouldn't agree with your point that they stopped getting creative with the bosses, but I wouldn't call the Chozo guards a bosses in the same way that we have been, I guess.
And what's your thought on that?
Well, I think what I mean is that boss or not a boss. I think what Jimmy is saying, I agree with in that there is another boss after that double Chozo guard fight that I don't think you got to, which is like it's the one where there's like the tentacles on the sides.
You're
of
in
the
the
wall.
front of the ship. It's like it's an X parasite is like taking over. Like
That's what it is.
But that one was the hardest one. For
I
me.
enjoyed that one. It was really hard.
Yeah.
So there are other bosses after that point. I think the problem is that for me, it's what you were saying, Jimmy, about it started to become like a gauntlet where it's just like, oh, I'm just, trying to progress and get to the end. And then for kind of no narrative reason, no gameplay reason, no any reason, I just walk in a room and it's like, 2 more Chozo guards. And I'm like, okay, it's just sort of, especially with the Chozo soldiers, there's like 5 of them.
Yeah.
And I definitely remember being like, okay, I mean, this is like the 3rd or 4th time I've done this, and it's not really changing that dramatically, but it's still kind of hard in the same way. Like, I don't feel like I've gotten significantly better to the point where it feels like it's a breeze to get through these guys, and it does stop your progress cold, and it just to me, that feels slightly lazy, just because it's like clear that they wanted to have some kind of hallmark here to be like, and now you have to progress through this, but they just stopped creating enemies. They just started putting the same ones in your path in different quantities, and that felt repetitive.
I'll definitely agree with you.
Particularly towards the end, when you really, I do think a good game will feel like you're running downhill a little bit at the end of a game. This is a very hot take, but I really like the way that Zelda bosses typically, the very final incarnation of the boss is typically not that hard. It's really just like, you just gotta not fuck up.
I like that.
I love in Breath of the Wild how the first part of the fight is genuinely challenging and quite a hard boss battle, but if you can make it past that second one is like not that hard.
It's more visual.
It's really much more just like, so you can, especially when with something like Breath of the Wild, you have like, it's like a huge, I could go on a whole other thing about how great that last sequence is in Breath of the Wild, but you really want it to feel satisfying and climactic, and you want that, like, your heart pumping. And, when you have to do a boss battle like 15 times, like, your heart stops pumping because you're not caught up in the narrative anymore, you're caught up in just the challenge of it, which is fine. It's just like, I would much rather feel like towards the end of a game, I'd much rather feel like I'm just swept up in the narrative, the fact that we're racing towards some sort of climax, rather than feel like, oh, I'm so close, and then I got stopped by two.
Well, I totally agree with you, but which is why I was saying earlier how I really liked that the last Emmy was kind of a cutscene, and the last boss is the essentially that first person kind of thing.
Right.
I totally agree.
I didn't
with
mind
you.
that the Emmy was a cutscene. I just take narrative issue with the hand device.
Sure.
Like,
and I think Ravenbeak was definitely not the hardest boss.
No, but it still was that. It didn't hit that.
Easy. It wasn't. Yeah,
it wasn't.
I hear what you're saying.
Because it becomes this thing where I'm just not invested in the climax at all, because I'm just focused on. It's just no room for vibes or enjoyment. It's just okay. Dodge. Watch out for this attack. Fire. Watch out. And it's like, so it's not as compelling.
I think too, and maybe my last point on this is, I think if going to like Zelda Twilight Princess, for example, there's the Cave of Ordeals. You remember that?
Yep.
So like they're in the Cave of Ordeals, and it was genuinely fun. There is a room and it's a very small room, right? And like there's a room that has 3, I think they call them Deku Knights or Deku.
Oh
yeah.
And like one of those guys is a mini boss, like literally a mini boss in the Temple of Time.
Right.
And then this is like there's 3 of them and they're close, and it's like, what the hell? This is impossible. But that's totally optional, totally just a boss rush.
Yeah.
Like. And that is okay to me, even if that is very hard. Like I could imagine a scenario where it's like, oh, like Metroid like challenge zone or whatever, which is maybe you unlock after the main story, where you fight like a just stupid amount of bosses that yes, you can get through. It's not impossible, but like it is more of that just chaotic energy.
Yeah.
But then it's like I know what I'm signing up for.
Right. If you're a player who wants a gauntlet like that and wants combat difficulty and it's really easy to like pepper in like a boss rush or whatever like on the side of the game for players to play. It doesn't need to be incorporated into the main story.
But I guess I would just say that Metroid is that game.
But Metroid wasn't that game for the first 4 hours. It was much more engaging and fun with the boss fights.
Right, and that's kind of like that's kind of like our point of contention here is that like I think that continued and you think that it didn't. Right,
fair enough.
But totally understand.
But again, because Metroid is a game that has a story and it's part of like
I actually don't know if that's true. Not that I'm downing you, but just from what I know. But like. Not that I think it's not, but this is like literally all of our first time playing Metroid, so I don't know if there's some sort of like...
It's just interesting that the language of this does say it's set after the events of Metroid Fusion. Like, it does... For better or for worse, it does seem to have some sort of narrative consistency, or at least like a... I don't know, a timeline of some kind.
My understanding is that this is like a sort of unique in the amount of story that it has in a game like this. And it's also been a really long time since, I think it's 10 years since the last 2D Metroid game.
It's been a long time.
If the 3DS one, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's see when Metroid Fusion came.
It's been a long time since a game like this. So there's been a lot of advancements since then. So like, but I hear what you're saying. I just think that's not the point of this game, but rather just a little, in my little like X factor.
Metroid Fusion is 2002.
Right. So it's been 20 years since the last 2D.
Is Metroid Other M a side scroller?
Hang on. Let me
I think this is not the most recent 2D Metroid game, but I do think that it is a sequel. Like you said, it's a sequel to Fusion, but it's not the... There was... Yeah,
well, that makes the point even more towards some sort of narrative timeline. If Metroid Fusion is not the most recent 2D side-scroller before Dread, then it means they're putting it in like a specific order for some sort of narrative reason, I assume.
Yeah. Maybe. But I do think that you would probably have...
called Metroid Zero Mission in 2004.
My guess is that you would both have the same opinion on... Or my guess is that all three of us would have the same opinion on Metroid Fusion. I don't know. I haven't played it, but like that...
I played it at summer camp. I remember being on the Game Boy.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, Fusion?
Fusion, yeah.
Oh, wow.
I mean, but that was like me playing my friend's Game Boy.
Right.
Definitely didn't complete that game.
Sure. I would be... I would actually be interested to play Fusion. I've heard people say... I've heard people say that this is like just as hard as the other ones, and that people are just like remembering incorrectly, or I've heard people say this is way harder.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have anything to like compare it to really, but yeah, I don't know. I think
you know what's an interesting. Sorry, this is one more sort of thing about difficulty that's interesting. Is I wonder if there's room for games to have difficulty settings that aren't necessarily tied to like easy, medium, hard. Mostly because I'm thinking of Fire Emblem Three Houses, which has a really interesting difficulty setting to it, where you can play in classic mode or you can play in like
permadeath.
Well, classic mode is permadeath mode.
Oh, okay.
But there's so like in Fire Emblem, just for context, and I know Robert, you haven't played Fire Emblem Three Houses, but like it's turn-based, combat strategy, and you can play at the beginning. You can choose to either play in classic mode or non-classic mode, whatever it's called. And in classic mode, when a player of yours dies, you lose them for the entirety of the game, and alternatively, you can choose it where they're like, they're like in the medical tent or whatever, and like they'll come back at the end of each turn of combat, or not turn of combat, but each combat scenario. Yeah. And that's a really interesting way to do it, because it's not like they're changing the difficulty of how to play the game. It's just, they're just saying, hey, if you don't want this like extra stress of like dealing with permadeath and like having to re-strategize based on that, well, here's a little forgiveness. So you can still play the game, have it be fun, but it's not like, you're playing on like little baby mode,
I need like Weenie Hut Junior mode.
Yeah, exactly. Or you're playing on like super ultra boss mode. It's just it's more about preference.
I think
than about difficulty.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why I think this is such a hotly contested topic in the video game industry in general, is because there's a lot of ways to approach it. I'm assuming it's actually quite difficult to implement from like a developing standpoint too. But like, I mean, to your point, like, I I don't mean to keep playing or bringing it back, but I just played it. So Crash 4, there's a couple of settings where when you die, you either, like if you lose all your lives, you go back not to the checkpoint, but to the beginning of the level.
Right.
Versus that didn't really mean anything to me. And I actually think it's kind of stupid because you do end up getting a lot of lives in the game anyways. But there was also stuff like under your character, you could have like a little like reticle like that shows where you're going to land versus just like nothing there. That's something that you can like add. I played in the classic mode just because it was what I was used to. I found it kind of distracting, but like, so yeah, I mean, I think that's an option, but I don't think there could have been something like that for Metroid. From what?
No, listen, I'm not a game developer. I'm not saying like, oh, you know what would have been really smart is to do this. I just mean that designing games with elements like that in mind because to suit. Because if kind of your argument is that it's not about difficulty, it's about play style, because you're saying, you know, oh, you guys are not as into like the 2D platformers and like the repetition. So it's like, it would be nice if some games would, if there were ways to adjust it to suit play style more so than difficulty.
Yeah, but like I said earlier, I actually do think that generally speaking, I think all video games should have, I mean, with a couple exceptions, have only 2 difficulty sections, but they should always have 2.
Well, but with Kina, my thing was Kina had difficulty levels, and towards the end of our playing of that game, I turned it down to story mode. I had it on normal, but I was just like tired of it and just ready to move on. And I found the story mode like frankly insulting.
The difficulty on that game was fucking awful.
But the story mode was insulting. It was like not even a game anymore. It was like I didn't get hit once. I didn't, you know. So that bothers me too, because I feel like, well, okay, I'm someone who like wants to have like some challenge and like I want to be engaged and thinking. But I don't want to feel like I'm banging my head against the wall.
That's why. I mean, I'm sure that's why they didn't do this, because it is really such a fine-tuned kind of thing. Yeah. Like, and Kana, the difference between normal and I didn't even play anything beyond normal because I thought normal was really hard. But I'm playing Horizon Zero. I think we're all about to play Horizon Zero Dawn informally. I'm playing on hard, and I find it super easy. So like, there's so many.
But you also played that game 3 times now, right?
Right, that's true.
Not to like expose you, but
no. I mean, and
like as you play a game more times, it'll get easier and easier. Like I've replayed a couple of Zelda games before, and like each time I'm like, it gets way easier because you remember all the puzzles and you remember how to do everything.
Right. No.
Part of the difficulty of a game is learning how to do it the first time, you know?
I
like
wonder... Sorry, I didn't mean to
Oh, no. Yeah. All I was going to say is like Breath of the Wild was obviously such a like reinvention for the Zelda platform. Yeah. And, I remember being a seasoned, long-time Zelda fan, really feeling like I started from the very beginning in Breath of the Wild because it was just about learning the controls, and then as the game goes on, it gets easier and easier. Yeah. And with Metroid, that never happened. It just was like, difficult from start to finish and like operating at the same speed. And so that doesn't feel like challenge or progression where I'm getting better at it. It just feels like it just, again, to use, I think your word about a gauntlet is like really apt.
I wonder for me personally, like how much my experience would have been improved if they even did small things like had a life meter for the bosses, just to know where I stood with them. Like I almost wonder, like, what would this game have been like for me if the controls weren't so funky, the mechanics worked more regularly, and there was like a boss health meter or whatever. Because I think that was also the tough part, is like, man, like doing things like, all right, turn 15 and I have no idea if I was close or not. Even with that final, or with the double Chozo guards, like when I did ultimately end up beating it, I had no idea I was getting close. It just all of a sudden happened, which was like, didn't make.
That's interesting. I didn't think about that. I do,
because that doesn't change the difficulty, but just to know where I stand might have like.
I think morale plays a big part in most video games. I think, and that's why I think they probably have that. And it's interesting. I haven't thought about that. I think that would have been.
We should probably
do closing.
Whatever. Thank you for the millions of people that have listened to all 2 hours of this conversation.
If you're still listening and you tweet at us, lads5, we'll give you a Tesla or something.
If you're still here, hi mom.
You bold of you to assume your mother is going to listen to 2 hours talking about Metroid.
Is it only 2 hours? I'd be proud
of that. First of all, my mom is a gamer through and through. She's the one who got me into Mario. Like,
my big gamers in my house.
She played the original Super Mario Brothers on the SNES, like until 4 a.m, throwing the controller on the ground. Like, she's more hardcore than me.
Yeah, my mom played the Wii Super Mario Brothers with me, but I ultimately ended up just carrying her as a toad across the entire map. So
I've done that with a friend before.
Let me do this.
Just hold on.
Yeah. All right, my mom really likes the Mario games, and she really likes the Crash Bandicoot games. She likes Animal Crossing, and she.
Animal Crossing?
Yeah, I
Cool.
bought her Animal Crossing because I think I got like 3 of the Animal Crossing Switches like on accident because I was doing it, and I gave one of them to her for
on
like
accident.
I gave it. Yeah, she really likes that. I think she hasn't been playing it recently, but anyway, she when she played the Mario games, she would always like she has a Game Boy, and she would use the Game Boy, and she would always tilt it like to try and make it like go like further in a jump or something like that.
Woman born has not tilted a controller in Mario Kart to like make a turn, or who has not been hit in Super Smash Brothers and said ouch.
That's the best part of the Switch is that when you're using the controller like a cart, you actually do if you're using
to
the,
quote
like,
a fan favorite quote of ours, you're actually so immersed.
Well, I think that's a great way to end it. Really great conversation.
Do we want to do like wrap up thoughts? Or
I would love to do like a sentence or two.
Oh yeah, sure.
In conclusion.
In conclusion, let's.
I just want to get one more jab in.
Let's go reverse order.
Great, yeah.
So that's you.
Cool. I mean, obviously, if you haven't found out by now, I was very upset with this game. I again respectfully agree to disagree with Robert. I do not think it was a well put together game for the reasons that we've been talking about for 3 hours or whatever. But
it's only two.
Only 2 hours. That actually that's not so bad.
We're gonna like come up right on the 2 hour mark, I think.
Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. Anyway, yeah. So I think what I'm interested to say here at the end is this might have been one and done for me for the Metroid franchise, with the exception of Prime, which I obviously know is very different.
I was gonna say I would do Prime, but I don't think I would pick up another 2D.
And I'm so sad because I really wanted to like this game, and I think it let me down. But well, I can't even say that I did it.
Do you want to say your rating again?
Yes, for the record, 2 out of 5 lads, and we'll hopefully. We'll have to see how Prime does when it eventually comes out, if it comes out.
Knock on wood.
Knock on wood.
I mean, I love this game. It's my first time in the Metroid franchise, and it kind of exceeded a lot of my expectations for it. I had a blast with the mechanics. I thought it was like so easy, and anyone who had difficulty with it's probably just like awful at video games. Where'd you get that gun?
Yeah, Jimmy and I are wielding weapons, cocking guns.
Yeah, I'm sharpening a spear.
It has come to my attention that many of you are stroking guns.
I really had a great time with it. I'm excited to potentially play other games like it in the future, and I'm really happy that I was able to experience this game for the first time. I'm sure very unique in a lot of ways, but it was great, and a 5 out of 5, rare 5 out of 5 lads for me from this one.
Fun fact: Robert's the only lad who has had fun this season.
It's been a rough season for you guys. I feel really bad.
Honestly, this game makes me look back at Deathloop, which we rated also kind of middling. And being like, what, I had a lot of fun playing that game.
Actually, the best game we've played so far.
Most of my complaints about the game were just narrative. The gameplay I thought was super fun. But yeah, also to sum up, I will just say, put the fun back in video games. I played Returnal earlier this year as well, and I found that to be also exceedingly difficult and like kind of taxing, and especially for full price games, where you're putting a lot of money down, that really, call me crazy, expect to have a little fun. And I just really lost a lot of my whimsy for this game quite early on, and it felt kind of like a chore. I think objectively it has a lot of merits. Really happy for all those Metroid fans out there. Yeah. And you can come find me at my apartment if you want to talk more and fight me. No. It's so fine.
Again, just please leave a comment on our Instagram post about how wrong Jack and I are.
Yeah, it's total. Listen, I'm not a Metroid fan, so I don't know the franchise super well, so I'm psyched that Nintendo took such a big swing with this game, and it felt at least super original and very like a very interesting take on this franchise and on the side scroller. Ultimately, it's a 2 out of 5 for me, just because I personally, on a subjective level, did not have a lot of fun in the completion of this game. And honestly, I would have put it down a lot earlier, not because of difficulty, but just because of fun, which I think really to me is what speaks to the difficulty rating question of, is this game too hard or not? It's like, I would actually probably say firmly no. It's just that I would have put it down earlier just for the entertainment value, or lack thereof.
Great. Well, awesome discussion. It was a lot more civil than I thought it was going to be, and I think.
Well, when the microphone goes off.
Yeah.
Just gonna throw hands.
If you've listened to this is probably after we've posted our full write up, maybe before. Yeah. I don't know what is going to happen with this, but we'll have on our website ladzugame.com a full write up about a particular topic of Metroid Dread, as well as a lot of other information. Please check that out. Check us out on Instagram at Ladzugame, Twitter at Ladzugame, and
do it soon because the lads are disbanding.
Yeah, this is the last one. All right, thanks for listening.